Today's backdrop is on the science of reading, which is a term that refers to all of the scientific study of reading and writing in English language arts, cradle to grave worldwide, just like the science of medicine or the science of agriculture. And if you've noticed articles like this one in the news in the past year or so, and people talking about the science of reading, what this has to do with is disagreements about generic approaches to teaching beginning, reading, and writing. So kindergarten age, first, second grade children, the primary grades. And there are different generic approaches to this. And the one that's been predominant in the United States until recently is called cueing. So children are learning simple texts in picture storybooks, and they're using the pictures and they're being encouraged to use different cues to recognize the words that they don't recognize. And so, or to figure them out. So they're using semantic cues, the meaning, syntactic cues, and as a last resort, they might be encouraged to try to figure out the beginning sound of the first letter in the name of, or the word that they don't know. So unfortunately, this approach wires the brain to guess. This literally trains the brain to be a bad reader. And what we know from 25 years of empirical and brain imagery studies is what's going on in the brains of readers who are proficient. So that involves instantly recognizing the spellings of words and associating them with the pronunciations and the meanings. And the methods that are based in that knowledge are referred to as structured literacy, synthetic phonics, and they're just fundamentally different from 3-cueing. Now, why this is really important is that children have a range of phonological aptitude for reading. So this is a model showing the green children with a high aptitude, and then the orange represents a lower aptitude, and the bottom dark orange represents children who are going to be identified as having risk of dyslexia or maybe reading deficits. And the earlier they can be identified, the better. I was one of the lucky ones. I learned how to read with Dick and Jane 60 years ago. I would have been up at the very top here. And the takeaway here is that children represented in green are going to learn pretty much with anything. So the 3-cueing, it's not a problem for them, but it's a big problem for the bottom half of all children who end up struggling in reading. We know this from the National Assessment Education Progress. The top green shows the last 30 years. We know from the past 15 years before COVID, that 1/3 of all children in the United States were at the below basic level in reading. Based on what we know about reading today, almost no one should be at below basic at 4th grade. And the bottom chart shows the broad federal racial categories. So 1/2 of all Native American, Hispanic, Latino, African American children are at below basic. I believe that 1/2 of all of the children in those subgroups in Wisconsin are at the bottom half of below basic. It's a criterion scale. It's not a normative scale. And if you're reading that low, it isn't that you're not proficient. You're not even at basic. So we hear a lot about how we need more teachers of color. Well, where are they going to come from? Because if you're reading that low at 3rd or 4th grade, the likelihood that you're going to go to college, if that's something that you wanted to do in the self-directedness of your life and to become a teacher, you're not, it's very unlikely that that's going to happen. So here's a model showing our national ranking. Wisconsin is the red. Massachusetts has been the NAEP leader. What's actually happened here is that our reading scores have remained flat for this past 30 years, while other states like Florida, is represented in yellow, have improved a lot because they've moved on from this 3-cueing. Some people think of it as balanced literacy. And in the past few years, I believe 18, 20 states have literally passed legislation in effect banning the use of the purchase of 3Qing system-based materials with public dollars. I had the really good fortune to meet Dr. E.D. Hirsch 25 years ago. He was at the Core Knowledge Foundation, and he had just written this really great book, The Schools We Need and Why We Don't Have Them. And he argued only an informed public will be able to finally forcibly convince the public education system, which he described as a thought world, to move on from the disproven psychological, constructivist, naturalist theories about how children learn. We don't naturally learn to read. We have to be taught. And a quarter century later, we're finally seeing states forcing their public education systems to move on from this queuing, this antiquated methodology. Inexplicably, our Department of Public Instruction, DPI, and Dr. Tony Evers, who was the former state superintendent, have literally refused to even acknowledge that this is a problem here in Wisconsin. This is the backdrop about the science of reading that everyone in Wisconsin, the public, needs to know so that we can finally force our public education bureaucracy to make reading education a priority for every student.